It's Friday, June 17th, 2022. My name is Ashton Ellett, here with another installment of the Two-Party Georgia Oral History Project, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia. I'm here in Newnan, Georgia today with State Representative Lynn Smith, a former educator in the Coweta County Schools and a small business owner. She is a proud graduate of the University of Georgia. First elected in 1996, Mrs. Smith represents District 70 in the Georgia House of Representatives. She currently serves on a number of committees, including Rules, Appropriations, Legislative and Congressional Reapportionment, and the Special Committee on Election Integrity. She also chairs the powerful Natural Resources and Environment Committee. Last but certainly not least, she is a Georgia Master Gardener, and that is attested to by these beautiful hydrangeas, which you may see right over her shoulder. But thank you, Representative Smith, for hosting us at your beautiful home here in beautiful Newnan, Georgia.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our interview.
Absolutely. And I was wondering if we could start. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and upbringing. You grew up in Florida?
Yes.
And we won't hold that against you or anything. but tell us about that and how you came to Georgia.
So I was born at the end of World War II, 1945, in August, and my parents lived in a small town named Sanford, Florida, but the only hospital available was in Orlando. So I was born in a hospital in Orlando. Lived an idyllic life as a child in Sanford, rode my bike everywhere. We had a lake, we had a zoo, we had just wonderful things, and kids could play everywhere and nobody worried about their safety. So for several years, until I was about 8 or 9 years old, then a transition began with my family and with me. So when people ask me the question about my childhood, first thing I think of is, well, my mom never kept a scrapbook on me. I mean, we just moved. She had a lot of kids, and from that point on, we moved. I lived in, first home after Sanford was Panama City, Florida, and then we moved to a place called Gretna, Louisiana, near New Orleans. Then we moved from there to West Palm Beach, Florida. Then we moved from there to Savannah, Georgia, where I kind of settled into St. Vincent's Academy. My family was a Catholic family. And then from there, my family moved to Jessup, but by that time, I finished my senior year at Wayne County High School.
Right.
We were a big family, didn't have the money for me to go to college, but that's what I felt driven to do, was to teach. So I had to work retail and save money, and I earned the Georgia State Teacher Scholarship, which paid for all the expenses, and the money I've saved helped me with my living expenses, and then I qualified for another scholarship once I was up there. But I had to work all the way through school, but it wasn't a hardship at all. I worked at a wonderful dress shop in Jessup, Georgia called Sullivan's, and so that in itself was an education for me about people and all like that. But if I ever reflect on that kind of background, I was always the new kid, and anybody who moves a lot. I didn't have the military as a fallback. I mean, we were just a nomadic family there for a while. It was the fate for a lot of people after World War II, and I just always landed in medias res. I was in the middle of everything and trying to figure out how to fit in. And on reflection, as I'm older, maybe that's what helped me become a student of human nature as much as anything. And so that was not an academic education. It was more of a survival education. But we had a strong family, good family to fall back on. My parents were born and raised in New York City, and a lot of times as a kid, I would spend summers with a relative in New York City. So I was trained to be an adult with lots of different cultural experiences. So,
you said you were a teacher, and you were, of course. What subject did you teach, or subjects did you teach?
So my original major, and this is before computers, so you have to understand, you stand in line to get your courses.
Over Memorial Hall?
Yeah, and Georgia at that time was in local parentis, which meant the university, or any university, had the authority of a parent over the student until they were 21. And so I slipped through the cracks, though. I followed the curriculum exactly what I had to do to graduate. I always made sure of that, but I was never assigned an advisor until I hit my senior year. And then I met my advisor, and my advisor, in loco parentis male mentality, saw that my specialties were in history, civics, geography, history, French history, the culture. I just was like you, I was a student of history. And so he took a red pen and marked all the way down all of my curriculum history courses. And I said, what are you doing? And keep in mind, I had to fight my way to get this degree. I mean, I wasn't coasting. And I just saw my whole future go in front of me because I was at the limits of what I could achieve financially. And so I said, what are you doing? And he looked at me and he said, honey, listen, I just got to tell you, you're never going to get a job teaching. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, what do you think football coaches teach? Oh. And so that was the beginning. That was my introduction into a world where I wasn't always the determiner of my fate. And so I didn't know what to do. He said, don't give up, don't give up. He said, what's all this French stuff? And I said, well, I always just had a liking of French, the culture, the people, the everything about it. And so I studied that. I mean, the wars. I mean, it's such a contrast during that period of time.
Sure.
And so I studied French. I loved the writers. I loved all because I would read their books and things. And so he said, well, that's what you're going to teach. And I said, well, I don't have, how can I? I said, I don't have the money. You need to understand that. I do not have the income to do this. And so he said, don't worry, you're smart. You're going to, he said, you're going to, is this a 5-hour thing? So I took 22 hours, the fall semester, well, it's quarters. And then I doubled up again. I can't remember.
22 hours in a quarter.
I know, but I doubled up. I had to double up fall and winter. Yeah, and then with spring was student teaching, and it was called correspondence courses. I had to take 2 correspondence courses. And I lacked 5 hours when that was all said and done. And I said, I couldn't graduate. So I said, well, what do I do to this guy? And he said, you can come to Georgia in the first week in August or second week in August of that year, and you can get 5 hours. In 1 week, 8 hours a day. That's how Georgia offered that curriculum. So that's what I did. And in the meantime, I'd married, and my husband was in the Army, and it was just that we were in war, really. They call it a conflict.
So this is Vietnam.
This is Vietnam. And he got his orders. He was a commissioned officer and got his orders to Anniston, Alabama. So that school system hired me to teach before I had my final degree. But teachers were sort of hard to find at that time, and I was going to be able to teach what they needed. So they put faith in me that I would complete and get that degree, which I did. And then since we lived in Alabama, I had to start paying off on my scholarship. I knew going in that I had this debt I had to assume, and the debt was forgiven if I taught in Georgia. So much percentage per year. So I started paying off that loan. Not much money as a teacher and a guy in the military, but I met that obligation. And so then when my husband went to Vietnam, I moved to Newnan, and I was teaching French and history and civics and geography and all at Newnan High School. And that's when we desegregated.
Right.
And so
tell me about that experience of integrating the schools. This would be like 1970, 71?
Yes. So it's a movement all over the country.
Sure.
And there was strife here and there. Our local citizens in Coweta County had voted to go to one school system. There was a Newnan school system and a Coweta school system. So they united into one school system. So the school board made the effort to lay the groundwork for facilitation of desegregation. They were just going to address it head on and make it work. And there was conflict and strife, but not to the extent that it was a headline for us. When I taught, I went between Newnan and what used to be the Black High School Central, but it was now a dual campus of freshmen at Central and then sophomores, juniors, seniors at Newnan High School. And so I commuted back and forth and taught that way. But so this is probably in part of your approach, but I think it's good for women to hear this. And so get back to the mentality of in loco parentis. And then there was also a shift and a change taking place. A lot of conventions were being overturned at that point in time. Well, one expected convention for women when they were pregnant was not to teach.
Right.
And so I didn't know. We wanted a child. A year went by and we didn't. Wasn't pregnant, and
sure.
So we just thought it would take a while, and I didn't think anything of it. And but I had some spotting and something like that. So I went to the doctor, and he said, "There's nothing wrong with you. You're just pregnant." And so I went, "Oh." And then I thought, well, the practice was not to say anything, and until you showed, and then you were expected to take a leave or do something. So I thought, okay, well, I've got but word got out, small town, and the principal, the administrator, I got called to the office, and I went in and they were just talking. They said, "Well, how's your health?" And I went, "Oh Lord, they know." And so I said, "Well," I said, "I had a little bit of trouble. I was at the doctor's office, but I'm okay now." And they said, "We understand y'all are expecting." And I said, "Yes, we are." I said, "But it's, I know it's a practice here to work until you show." And they said, "Well, we're really worried about your health." And so they said, "We think you just need to not teach starting now." And they said, because back then, I was walking up and down stairs. My tape recorder, which is all I had as a teacher for a foreign language, weighed 15 to 20 pounds. So I was toting it up and down the stairs and going back and forth to 2 different campuses. And there was manual labor involved. And they were concerned for my health. And all at that point in time. And anyway, they raised several different issues, and they were doing it just in my interest. And it sounds bad on them, but and I suffered because of it. But if you're looking at history, they were only doing what was an accepted practice culturally at that point in time. I was just suffering because of it.
Right.
So anyway, they were worried about stress, right? Well, I lost my income. We had a house, we had a mortgage, stress multiplied. And so, but finally, we just came to terms with how to manage it. We realized we might lose the house. We just really realized all these things. But I got a phone call about 3 weeks after I was asked not to come back. And they wanted to see me. And I thought, oh, maybe they're just going to let me teach in the office or be in the office or something like that. So I went back. And they said, well, upon reflection, we think that it will work for you to come back to teaching. And I said, pardon me? What do you mean? And they said, well, they couldn't find a French teacher.
So much for concern with your health.
If you like irony, which is what all good novels have in them. So here, ironically speaking, that exit professor ensured I had a job. Forget football coaches. It's what saved. And so my life's been peppered with irony throughout because I'm a female crossing every ravine there was for a female to this point. And some way or another, a bridge or something would come and I could take it. It's treacherous sometimes as it was. And so I thought, well, middle child, a big family, lots of experience dealing with difficult things. And so I looked at him and I said, I would love to do it, but how can I? You've told me it's bad for my health. You told me I can't do this. You've told me I can't do that. You told me I can't do that. I said, I really want to teach. I need to teach, but what are you going to do to address the concerns you gave me? And so they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, there's a janitor who hides out and only acts when he's called upon to act, like if somebody gets sick or something like that. I said, he can carry my equipment for me. He can help me with all of this. And I said, I want to teach, and I see that y'all want me. So let's address your concerns, and I will be happy to come back and teach. So it should have been a hostile environment, but I didn't want hostility. I had to win too. So it sounds acrimonious, but it was the times, and it was me trying to survive.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, and it's clear that the administrators expected you to come in hat in hand and
but everything,
scrape and say thank you.
But my life had already been hard when I found out I couldn't go to college. I had to work. I had already faced so many difficult hurdles that this had become another hurdle. But I had kind of figured out that to thrive and to survive, you have to be your own defender. And so that was really what I was doing at that point in time. And then as I would see them, I said, no, how long do I get to teach? And well, they couldn't find another French teacher. They kept hoping they could. So as my pregnancy progressed, my dresses got shorter. And then they wouldn't let me wear pants because women didn't wear pants back then. And so I would go by periodically and go, I think pants might be in order. And so, but they wouldn't. So finally I said, y'all, I can dress discreetly in pants. I'm obviously not going to appear as a man. I said, so I joked along the way. Humor has always been an icebreaker.
Sure.
And you don't back people in the corner if you try and lessen the intensity. So I broke the mold by teaching and by wearing pants. But there is a photo of me in the yearbook of me with the dress that finally turned the page to pants. And so
they changed that policy.
They changed that, yes. And but you can either spend your life with grudges, or you put them in perspective and you keep going. And that became. I didn't have the knowledge of what I'm just saying to you now. I just knew I was in a coping situation. I had to cope, and I had to make the best of it. And I would be better off if I left with no enemies. And so that was how I approached things. My parents were both highly educated, and we were in a family of. My father was taught by Jesuit priests. He went to Fordham University. He went to Columbia University. You always question why, and you seek the answers, and so the intellectual probing was always a part of my life. My mother had a high school education back in the early 1900s, and she had the gift of Blarney. She was Irish, she was Gaelic, she had a unique talent for humor, and she could laugh at the absurd. And so I had that environment, and as being kids in a big family, a lot of times we had to make it on our own anyway. So that's not an upbringing now for people, I don't think, but it was for my generation. It really was, and so that got me to. Then I taught another year after my child was born, and then we wanted another child, and we were at a point at that time where I could be at home for a few years, which I did, and then I got involved in our printing business.
Was that because your husband had started or established his business, or?
So it's a little bit of everything.
Okay.
He switched over to. He was in banking. Left banking with an opportunity to buy and run the printing company, but he also qualified for the GI Bill.
Sure.
And the GI Bill brought in enough money, because at that point in time he was still at the bank, and he made more money for our income by the bank paying for his education, which they wanted to do, his master's. and the GI Bill, we netted $100 a month. So that's what freed me up. That's what freed us up. And then, yeah, as you get older, your salaries increase, your ability to earn a living increases. And but I got drawn back into the business. In the interim, when my children were home, would go to their schools, and I began doing segments of French for the classes. So I taught French as a way for me to help the schools where my girls were. So I did that for a while. And then I got wholeheartedly, not always, it was not my choice to run a printing company, but I did. You had to go back into banking. The first computer was a computer directed towards printing and pre-press and all that kind of work. So we had to change our whole business model. And so he went back to banking, and I started running the printing company.
So was it here? Was the bank here in Newnan? And
yeah, it's C&S Bank at the time, and then he went to a savings and loan bank, and it was. Do you know, it's just changing times, and right now, if anybody is going to view this at any point in the future, we're going through that same flux. It's just a flux. Every now and then, culturally, our nation or other nations settle, but then there's always another factor, catalyst that comes in and changes things. So that's what. And then I got involved in the Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, so is that how your political career, or had you always been interested in politics?
No, I actually got backing up when I was home with my children. I was president of the Newnan Junior Service League.
Okay.
So that was a political lesson. And then the mayor appointed me to the Carnegie Library Board.
Okay.
Which became the second or third or fourth political lesson for me. Our library, our population was at 50,000. Our library service was landlocked in downtown Newnan with no access for the people at the county. Businesses had all the parking places. So we were going to lose state funding for the library. So we were at a crossroads as the library. And my friend who was chair of the library board, when we started doing our research on what to do, how to maintain the funds we needed.
Right. So
anyway, we started getting nasty phone calls about destroying the Carnegie building, and so.
Seems a little excessive.
No, back then you have to get history person here. Get back then to the times, and there was a movement to protect your historical buildings and structures. We had no role in that. That was the local government's role, not ours. So anyway, that. This is going to be a long story. You might need commercials. No. So back then, the city and county had an agreement. The county managed the airport for the city county, and the city managed the library for the city county. And but the narrative then was that we were going to destroy the Carnegie building. And so my friend who chaired the building was an attorney, young attorney. Well, he was losing business, so he had to resign. And then I got elected chair. And there were a lot of older Newnan people on the board, but they didn't want to step out in front. And so it's kind of like you wake up one morning and you go, how did I get here? But it was extreme controversy. Our community it anchors itself in its history, and so the fear was the Carnegie building the city would take it back over and destroy it. So I asked everybody on the board. I said, before we go forward with me as chair, I want to know what y'all think our role is, and so I said, don't do anything right now, but. Before our next meeting, write down why you are a trustee of the library board. And I said, and then I'll read them, and then I'll let y'all know what happened. So at the next meeting, we adjourned for a little bit, and I read everything, and I came back, and I looked at the board, and I said, you're not going to believe this, but every last one of us thinks our job is to provide the best library service to the community. I said, nowhere in here did any of you say preserve the building. And I said, but we all want the building preserved. So I suggest we do a resolution as a board to our city council that we think it's important that they take the steps in place to preserve the Carnegie building, but our role is to do the library service. And then we asked them to fund a study of how we go about doing it. So we had a study, and then they had a study to study our study, but then the decision was made the city publicly committed to saving the Carnegie building, but we needed to build a new building. Well, to get the fundings from the state, both the city and the county had to commit. So here we go. And so people had bets as to whether or not I could get that done because there was friction, terrible friction between the city and county. We were just beginning to grow.
Right.
And so all those factors were coming into everything that tempered their debates and what was going on. Plus personality was a big thing back then. 2 different strong personalities. So in the end, it finally came together. I had a good friend who was on the city council, and he came to me and he said, "We got to meet." And I said, "Oh God, what are we going to?" Whenever you hear that, no. So we went out for supper, and he said, "We're about to make this happen." He said, "But there's only one thing left to do." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "The county will participate and do the money, but y'all have to resign."
Oh my gosh.
and so, looking at the problem, this county viewed it as a city-run library.
Right.
And so I looked at my friend. He's still alive. We're both still alive, believe it or not. So I looked at my friend and I said, "You can go back and tell the city council right now that I feel like we're going to agree to that. But I can't speak for them. They have to vote. And I will get back with you." And so we all voted to do it. And we resigned. And so, not necessarily resigned, we turned in our, whatever it was we did. We gave up our role as trustees. That's what we did.
I see.
And so, 2 weeks later, the county and city agreed on their appointments, and they reappointed all of us. I told you life is irony.
Yeah.
So that was my helping us learning to fight for my own career in education. Then learning how to handle, as a teacher, desegregation in my role in that was a learning experience. And we had, it was open. Parents could be in our classrooms. They couldn't just walk in. They had to go through the office. But the transparency was so important during desegregation that I would have 3 or 4 parents in the back of my classroom while I was teaching. And because they were worried about their children, either black or white. They were worried about the safety of their children. And so that was just how it had to be. But an aside to all of that is the students behaved a lot better because the parents were in the back of the classroom.
I don't know if that's necessarily true today. But
No, back then I could call a parent of a black student, I could call a parent of a white student. I could say they're sleeping in class. I could say this is the 3rd day they've not turned in their homework. The next day they'd have their homework and they'd be awake. So I had the support of parents. We were not such a litigious school process back then. Even though we were going through desegregation, which was a much higher level of litigation,
right.
but I had the support of parents. And I could turn to them for help if I needed help. And so, I don't know, it's just a different environment. And we have to adjust as people and as a culture as our environment changes.
Well, you've talked about your experience, sort of your political education in work, in school, in civic life. What I haven't heard is, political campaigns and legislators and presidential races and stuff like that. Was that something you followed, or was that?
So I was a supporter of Bo Calloway and Bo Ginn. So I mean, I was Republican, but I wasn't. It wasn't. times 10 back then. You're either a Democrat or Republican, and most of our state at that point in time was Democrat.
Oh, absolutely.
But see, I grew up believing in the right of the individual to work hard. I didn't believe that you wanted handouts. I mean, you had to earn. So
as was your experience.
As was my experience. So I believed in the power always in my life of the individual. I had to learn to believe that the individual needs to live in a culture where they, without undue restrictions, can set their own course. So, so that philosophy is more, I believe that way, therefore I was Republican, not I'm Republican, therefore I'm this way.
I see.
And I've always been that way. So actually I think if you talk to people, most people are that way. Only in the last few years have we kind of settled on teams, but before that it was philosophy.
Right.
And but a lot of what I'm telling you is political in nature, in that there's conflict and resolution. But I seem to always be at a crossroads in my community where there's a conflict and a need for a resolution, and I have no idea why. But just looking back, reflecting back, when we first started talking, I thought, good God Almighty, how did I get this role? You know, but I eventually became chamber. Well, I'll tell you about the library. We got the library built, and then, if we didn't have to raise money for books, that was one thing that wasn't in there. So I had to do this campaign. But I had an allergic reaction to a drug called sulfa, and it was terrible. And I was in Emory for months, and I was on IVs just to survive because it had attacked my colon. So I had major surgery. God and I talked a lot back then, and I was just so angry because here I am. My husband was going through PTSD. We didn't even know what it was back then.
Right. And
my mother had bladder cancer. I was trying to run the business, and my two daughters, I was trying to make everything work. So I didn't have, so stress was the factor. It didn't cause the reaction, but stress was the factor.
Sure.
And so I was fighting a losing battle, and really twice medically. I died, but was in a place where the doctors were there. One was the massive blood transfusions, and the other time was just organ failure. And they were able to bring me back both times. So from that point, that was 1987. This is phase 2 of my life, I guess, or phase 3 or phase 4. I don't know. I led 3 lives. I've led 6 lives. But I went back to running the printing company. I ended up, with the library. When I was in the hospital, I survived on IV steroids and IV blood is what kept me alive. And so when I finally got through all of that, I just, when someone was trying to ask me a question about the library when it all first happened, and I said, well, I won't be able to help right now with that when I was still more aware. And I said, but listen, let's just do that. If I die, you bury me in front of the library, put a fountain on top of me, and have water running in it so people will throw money in there, and we'll keep raising money for the books. I mean, what do you do? I mean, you're in this, you're on this band of whatever your life is, and so that was my mom's humor coming out.
Right.
I mean, just snarky, but anyway. I went on to chair the Chamber of Commerce, and it was a transitional period of time. Local banks were being bought out and becoming regional.
Right.
Your local utility companies were being absorbed and becoming regional. So traditional supports for your small county were these units who were that money was no longer available to help your local county, your Chamber of Commerce's make it. So we were at a huge crossroads when I had to assume the role as chair of the chamber, and maybe based on my experience with the library, I knew we needed to bring in a consultant, and we needed to just look at ourselves differently than what we were. So we spent that whole year, and I got So the city and the county still weren't happy, we still weren't getting along, but I worked it that day, and they couldn't do it directly, but through the Development Authority, they could help fund the study of the chamber, because we all had to work for the economy of the area. So we worked through the Development Authority. I got the deep pocket big businesses to contribute money, and we did our study for a year. And it was, at that point in time, is that economic development needed to be carved out and focused one way. And the role of all chambers is its membership, and most of our new business came from our existing members anyway, so we focused more on the on that. But that was a really hard year, and I took a lot of hits for all of that, because it was in the end it was a personnel change. But I had when this all came up, I had just asked that they give us this time and let us see what we can do. And I don't know how else to say it, but I had somebody come up to me and say, "Here I am, a female," and he said, I had the balls to do something, is what he said. So I don't know if that, what do you say? But so again, the goal wasn't me, the goal was solving the problem. So I think if you, to put two words to my name, it's a problem solver. And I didn't come by that naturally. From our talk here, I coped as I hit each problem. And so because of that, when my friend, who was the state representative, did not want to run again, she came and asked me, and then the business leaders came and asked me to run for her open seat. And it was a contested race, both Republican and Democrat. I beat Speaker Murphy's Democrat.
Who was that?
Doc Davis.
Doc Davis, yeah.
You remember, you probably have some notes on Doc Davis. And then my opponent, and it was interesting because this was a shift that has been going on in my community kind of ever since, and then now is more of a national type movement. Our community, some of the people who were Republican in our community at that time were more into philosophy, argument, ideology, and starting to format adjectives that described the adjectives as to what Republican was, as opposed to a consensus, or it just changed. And so the person running against me in the Republican primary was all about this ideology, that ideology, and it wasn't anything about people. But the think tank type approach was that's when I first saw it raise its head, which now influences everything we do pretty much. And now we've formed ourselves into teams as opposed to a lot of times problem solving. I do believe in local and state governments and people. I mean, I'm a citizen legislator. I have to live among the people. I need to know what things cost. I need to pay for what things cost. And so at that level, state level down, we're anchored by reality. And one of my sisters and her husband lived inside the Beltway, and they said life is just different inside the Beltway. People get removed. And so I still have faith in how local and state governments are run. And that's just an aside to talk to you about my career, because I truly believe the purpose of government is, first of all, you need an educated citizenry who's able to make the right decisions, which is where we come in for education, providing the education and or providing access, because now we have online learning, you have in classroom learning, you have homeschooling. All of that should come together to form an educated citizen to have a good democracy.
Right.
And so I find that lacking now in a lot of areas. But anyway, I would just say I see my role in everything I've ever done is problem solving.
Well, you come in 1996, 97.
And I worked in the Olympics. I was an envoy.
There you go.
For Benin, and so I spoke.
How did was it? You just draw your name out of a hat?
No, it was French, and I went through the process.
Perfect. Okay.
But
that makes perfect
But
sense.
I hadn't used my French in a long time, but I had working French, and so I became part of the envoy team for that nation, which is a wonderful gift because the Republican. I won the Republican primary by about a little over 20 votes, and so there should have been a recount. So, but back then it was all paper and all that stuff. So the recount didn't take place until August, which is when we were hot into the Olympics.
Yeah.
Because see, the elections weren't they're in the summer back then. So I got a very good perspective on life when I was working with the people from Benin, and it was a gift. I mean, I learned that it's just like your seesaw. If it's too far this way, you're falling off of that way, and it's that balance. And here came that gift of working with such good people and being able to help them. So whatever happened with the election happened. It became my attitude.
Right.
But I won that, and little did I know I was taking on Speaker Murphy's. I mean, I wasn't philosophically. The Republican Party reflects my views, still does, but political was when I got my lesson. Going up against Speaker Murphy, my God, I didn't. And then barely winning the Republican, but I won like 67% of the vote. You can find that record with the general election. And then I've had threats of opposition here and there, but I served for 26 years, and this is the first year I've had opposition. So, and a lot of times that comes about with redistricting.
Sure. Oh yeah.
But
naturally.
but also now. The mood of our country is such that that taking sides aggressively seems to be how people want to define themselves. And I can tell you right now that never solves the problem. And I learned this as a little kid. I mean, in a big family, I want to be able to put my head on the pillow at night as a kid. I don't want one of my sisters mad at me when I go to sleep and I'm telling them what they do to me during the night. So you never want somebody in the corner. If you really back somebody in the corner, the only option they have is to come out fighting. And I at times have been put in corners, but my goal was to win, but not to have an enemy. And so I mean, and there are people that I like being around. There are people I don't like being around, but I'm just well aware of my role as problem solving. And it culminated this year when I was able to get the constitutional amendment passed, which we can go back to in a little bit.
Sure.
But with the water issues, and actually Speaker Murphy and I became. We had a working relationship. First time I went in to see him, and
which not every Republican could say.
No, but he didn't know what to do with women, Republican women. He knew he hated Republican men. He didn't know how to handle Republican women. And so all these people were offering to come in and go with me to meet the speaker, and I thought, wait a minute, I'm the one elected. I don't want to go in with somebody else's baggage, all these helpful people. So I went in and met with him by myself, and he just started talking, and I started talking, and I said, well, Mr. Speaker, I know you want to, one of the things I'm supposed to do is to tell you the committees I want to be on, but I'm going to tell you, I got advice both ways. I got advice to tell you I only want to be on one and let you do the rest. I got advice to pretend I don't want that one and give you other ones. And I said, so here's where I think I would help our state. I said, I live in the same part of the state you do. We've got problems with water. We've got problems with Alabama. I said, I've got the Chattahoochee River that runs through me. And the water wars were just kicking up. And Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, U.S. House. So I said, I think I could be somebody useful on that committee. And I said, so there it is. It's your call. And I said, and I know you're going to put me on stinky committees after that if you give me that one. And when I left, he said, well, you and I'll get along fine. Just don't ever stab me in the back. And I said, I will let you know my movements. So
I'll be sure to stab you in the front.
So when it was a difficult vote, I would go by the office and say, let the speaker know I'm voting Republican. Just keeping the door.
You kept your word.
And keeping the door open. And sometimes you'd get lobbied to do something a certain way, but you would get it from your own party as well. Parties don't always describe issues.
And Bob would have been the leader, your leader in '90s, Bob Irvin, right?
Bob Irvin. And Bob was he was just a highly intelligent person and good historical background, a lot of knowledge and all. The times just weren't right at that point in time. And so, and then that's when we started transitioning over to Republican. In 2002, Purdue won, and the Senate won Republican.
Right.
And then 2004, the House went Republican.
Right.
So, see, I lived that transition, but the Speaker put me not only on the Natural Resource Committee, but he made sure I was on every study committee. So I got groomed, maybe not intentionally, but I got exposed to and learned. And I was really good at telling, when I was first up there, I mean, some naiveness on my part, I was really good at expressing the problems of our area. I said, well, I don't need to show you the Chattahoochee River, just take a deep breath, you can smell it.
Yeah,
because Atlanta was just polluting it, something terrible. It was terrible. And so, but then I learned, they each have their own water problems throughout the state. So as I was on these different committees going around the state, I made it a point to learn about saltwater intrusion. I made it a point to learn about aquifer storage and recovery. I made it a point to learn about these river basins and those river basins.
The Flint River had just flooded.
Massively. Coffins were floating down there in Albany. So I started becoming a student of water issues for our state. And then when we got the majority as Republicans, more people, Glenn Richardson was the speaker.
Right.
And then Jerry King was a speaker pro tem. And then Mark Burkhalter was over appropriations. And those were the three vying to be speaker. And so Purdue had a meeting with those three. So when Richardson created something called the Committee on Assignments, which was duplicating what was done in D.C. And so I went in I wasn't on that Committee on Assignments, so I went in to make my case for being chair of natural resources. And my approach was different from everybody else. When I went in there and I looked, and I said, I know y'all have got to make this decision. I looked at the different people there and I said, and I've been to your part of the state and I know that this is your concern. Been to your part of the state and I know this is your concern. And I said, I can't tell you as chair that there can always be a solution, but I can say as chair, you will always be heard and I will make sure that we work together to find solutions. Well, more people applied to be chair of natural resources than anybody else, because we were all caught up in these water wars now, and it was our economic development, and it was before the bad droughts hit. Oh, yeah. So this was a paramount issue. More wanted that committee than appropriations and Ways and Means.
That's shocking.
Well, and not when you live during that context of time.
Right.
So that was I got the job. And I appointed the two biggest contenders as chairs of subcommittees.
who were your opponents?
Who emerged among the three? One was Tom McCall.
Okay.
So I made sure that he dealt with agriculture and water issues, and then the other was Judy Manning, and she was Cobb County area, and I made sure that she had her say on water issues, sharing of water resources and such as that. And for years they were my chairs, and then they moved on to other things.
Sure.
But I just knew my job was to pull people together, solve a problem, and pull people together to do it. And so and then from then as I've had new members come on, I've watched for the ones who are really interested in issues, and I've done what I can to help promote them in their role.
So what were you able to do in your time? And obviously you're still on environment, natural resources. What were you able to do in terms of water, and I know there's a big state park on the Chattahoochee Bend now. What were you able to accomplish on the water issues in the 90s and 2000s?
So the water compact that was put together by the 3 states was passed that first year I was up there. They just left out one word, which was allocation, which was the whole point of the battle. And so from that point forward, I was still part of this water study committee team. Bob Hanner had been chair of natural resource. He and I are friends, and so he's deceased now, but he was a great leader. And so Bob and Richard Royal and I and Tom McCall were the 4 who had knowledge of water issues, and we kind of worked together ongoing. And we had these study committees that were formed in the early 2000s. And one of the study committees was to study a committee, to create a study committee to determine how to manage our water regionally as a state. Because we had in-depth experts come in at one point in time with one of our water study committees. And we knew that we had to deal with water resource, water quality, water quantity. We had to deal with economic development, and we had to deal with population. And we also knew we had the watersheds and the overlay of local governments. And so that led, oh Lord, my calendar years, that led to, the drought was 2000, the intensity of the drought was 2007 and 8 and 9, but we were able to pass the regional water plans during that period of time. And there were people who felt they could not vote for it because they would be acquiescing some of the power for a certain region of the state. That everybody was afraid to let this overarching guide become the Bible for the state with its water resources. And so the drought, when we had to vote to accept the regional water plans, I think the drought freed up some of my legislators who normally would have voted no because of their area. They could go back home and say, you can't grow crops. Atlanta doesn't have the money to, nobody's thriving. We have got to do this. We've got to pull together. And I credit the drought, and the drought, 2 droughts made me accomplish what I needed to for water management for our state. And I guess that was the biggest achievement for me. I knew, just like everything else I did, I knew we needed this overlay that would work. And I knew that impacted areas had to be the ones to make the calls in the context of a greater good. And so I saw that fruition with that. Then I worked on and been sponsors of several different water type bills, but to me that's the biggest one. And we had a water stewardship bill that came after that, and I was chair of the committee, but you always try and bring in new leadership and such as that. So you'll see my name as the number 2, 3 signer, but from that point forward, I see my role as chair is bringing people along with the knowledge I have and letting them gain their own knowledge. So I try and encourage others to do that. But Judge Magnuson was court-appointed special master for one of our water war consolidation problems. And his action was draconian in that he threw our state back to the 70s, which was allocation for Lake Lanier and Lake Allatoona before our population increase or industry growth and such as that. And so I have no idea of his logic or why. And of course, we could challenge that to the
Sure.
Supreme Court. But in the meantime, our backs were up against the wall, and that's when Governor Perdue convened that big, huge study effort to try and figure out what to do. And from there, we finally got the court ruling. See, you sue when you have lawsuits against states. We don't manage the Corps lakes or the dams, or that's the Corps. That's the U.S. government.
Yep.
And so
Army Corps of Engineers.
So most of the lawsuits were against the Corps, the Mobile or the Savannah Corps, and so, but then, so there were two senators from Alabama who would never fund planning for the Corps during that period of time because they didn't want it to negatively impact Alabama. Because see, it's always an economic war. When we talk water, we're talking economics too, as well as survival, and so all of that. Oh Lord, all of that was going on, and the last lawsuit, which was would have the most negative impact if there'd been a bad ruling against Georgia, was Florida actually sued the state.
Right.
And so that ratcheted it up, and but if we hadn't had our regional water plans, if we hadn't had obligations and metrics we had to meet, if we hadn't had funding that needed to go to these different areas and self-funding within the regions, our state would not have had the data it needed to prove beyond a doubt that we were good stewards. It helped our farmers in Southwest Georgia. It helped our business and industry up here. We consumed more water north of Atlanta, but when it returned, which is in Whitesburg, we only used up about 1% of it. We had learned how to be better stewards of our water through just utilities,
Right.
and management, waste management, such as that. So if we hadn't done the regional water plans, we would not have had the data. We would not have had the connections. We would not have had the interaction of all of our different state leaders to pull together to solve our problem. And so I guess if that's a legacy for me, it's there. And really, I realize as I've gone on that part of my job now is that of a guide and a leader to the upcoming leadership that I identify for natural resources.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah.
Do you want a commercial break? I'm just joking.
Well, I was maybe after I ask this question, you'll want one. Water, obviously, economic development, resources, agriculture being a hot button issue, but one of the cultural hot button issues of that time was the state flag. And the Georgia state flag had been changed in 1956 during the Civil Rights Movement, and there was a push. Governor Miller had attempted to change the flag prior to your getting to the legislature, and Governor Barnes was intent on pushing something through. Can you tell me about the process and how the legislature, because everybody always says Governor Barnes changed the flag, but it had to go through the legislature to do so. Can you tell me about that experience and the legislation and some of the blowback from that?
So let me kind of put a perspective here. When I first ran for office, because of Miller, the flag issue was out there. And people were choosing sides. When I ran, my first time running for office, I made it a point. I went to the Sons of Confederate Veterans meetings. I went to their events, their activities. I also went to all the public buildings that were not flying the Georgia flag. And I said, why aren't you flying the Georgia flag? And they said, because if you're a school, we have students that it disenfranchises them. If we're a business, we have employees that we don't want to take a position on. So the flag had become a tool as opposed to a flag for the state. In other words, it had been compromised for an issue. And so I taught history. I mean, I did not in any way want to ignore our past history, but at the same time, my community, just like puzzle pieces, and I was putting them together, was what I was getting is don't forget our past. Don't. I mean, some people still remember which family they were refuting with. I mean, they still carried that to this, to this day. And and my husband's family ancestors fought in the Civil War. So I knew you didn't turn your back on history, but I knew that there were points and times when you had to move forward. But I didn't know how I would ever vote on the flag if it ever came up. I had no idea. I thought that throwing that gauntlet down, it's this or that, was not a good idea. And that's where the Denny's placemat came in.
The Denny's placemat, that's right.
Which was the first flag, and it had every flag of Georgia, including the U.S. flag, on the flag. And I thought, okay, they can't turn their back on anything, which I saw it as transitional.
Right.
But it was a vote I could make.
A compromise flag, for example.
It was a compromise flag. And I didn't expect to get reelected. I mean, I knew that. I knew by voting that. I knew that, they're just, you're not up there to get reelected. You're up there to represent. And at that point in time, I felt like I was representing a lot of different people, including the people whose ancestors we respect and know. And so I made that call, but I knew that would be a rallying point, and I knew that these would be very angry people. So I expected not to win. I didn't even know if I'd run again. And but then the attacks started happening. And I got delivered 30 pieces of silver, and I got phone calls, because we didn't have cell phones. I had phone calls all night long threatening me. I had just all kind of stuff happening to me. And I was just trying to absorb it and go on. But then our garage area at that point in time was a carport, so it was open. And so that part of our house was accessible. And during the middle of the night, about 2 in the morning, we had this big old dog, called her Babe. She's huge. And she just started barking like crazy. So both my husband and I up, and he grabbed a golf club. And we went to the door that led out to the outside, to the carport area. And there was this dark figure was there, and was in the front part of that carport. And when Charlie got there, and the dog was there, and he said, "I'm letting the dog loose," or something like that. The guy ran off. Yeah. And so we thought it was over. We couldn't identify him. It was just a dark, black clothes, black hat, that kind of thing. No description. I didn't think it was over. We were going to have to figure out what to do to protect ourselves. But the next day we were in session, and I drove to the session, and it was a mid-range rain, and so it wasn't pouring, but you had to drive carefully. But my car kept hydroplaning, and I thought, this is strange. My car is just all over the road. So I got in the right lane and just drove slowly to the Capitol and drove back home. It was misting rain, but it was still kind of all over the place. So I went back then we had service stations, and we had people who took care of your cars for you. So the guy put my car up on a rack, and he came to me. He said, "Miss Smith," he said, "you need to call the police." I said, "Why?" And he said, "There are several nails in your right front tire." I said, "Oh, is that what happened?" He said, "That's not only what happened, but that front tire controls your car." He said, "Someone meant to kill you." And I went, "Oh my God." I couldn't believe it. And so I said, "Okay, you need to change the tire."
Yes.
"I want you to hold the tire." I said, "I'm not going to the local police. I'm going to deal with it tomorrow at the Capitol." So the next day, Charlie and I, my husband, we talked about it. What in the hell do you do? We didn't know what to do. We couldn't couldn't point out and identify somebody.
Right.
We had proof of all the threats because there were multiple threats recorded with messages, paper messages back then, and phone calls and all that stuff. So we knew of all these different threats. But when I got to the Capitol, I decided, because see, the vote happened after our trip to Milledgeville when we celebrated our 250th year.
Mm-hmm.
That vote occurred either that week or right after that. I'm not sure right when it happened, but then we had that vote, and I made the decision. We had less than an hour to decide to do, and I didn't talk to anybody. People were just trying. I said, I'm going to make up my own mind, and so I decided that that it protected and recognized our history, and that it was, to me, a bridge movement to try and get us to a place where something would come later. And so I voted for it. And I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just made that decision. So that next day, after that break-in and damage to that tire, I went to the governor's office before session started. And they said, well, he's tied up, you can't see him. I said, yeah, he'll see me. And they said, well, what's your problem? I said, someone tried to kill me yesterday, and he'll see me. It's about the flag. And so I went in, and he said, well, just tell me what happened. He had a guy named Bobby Kahn. Do you remember Bobby Kahn?
I know Bobby.
Bobby
very
Kahn
well.
kept everybody away from the governor. Well, I wasn't going to play that shit. I mean, I went right to the governor, and I said, the way you did it, I disagree with. I would have voted for this. You gave nobody any chance, which is further aggravated the situation. You took what would have been a difficult vote and aggravated it. I said, and look at me, because I'm the consequence of that. And this is what happened to me. And so he said, I just could not imagine somebody doing something like that. And I said, well, it's out there and it's going on. And I said, and I'm just telling you, I don't know what to say, but you need to know it. And I don't know how I get protected, because I have no idea. Because obviously they're going to keep coming after me. And so he said, well, the first thing you're doing is you're going to go back to Newnan, and I'm sending a GBI down there with you. And they're going to sit with you, they're going to talk to you, we're going to try and find out ways to protect you. But you're right. It can come from anywhere at any time. And so Charlie and I, my husband, we talked again, and I said, you know, Charlie, I felt like it was something I was having to manage personally, but I'm the state representative, so that took it to another level. And so I went public with it, and I told the newspaper what was going on, because I thought, so if anything does happen, it is public. It won't get hidden at the Capitol, won't get hidden anywhere. And so, but the main thing the GBI guy told me, and back then I didn't have big chairs. He could have, it took 2 chairs for him to sit down. He was a big guy. I thought, you just need to come with me from now on. And so, but anyway, his lesson to me was, for the rest of my life, someone will try and come after me. And so he said, all we can do is try and teach you how to be aware of your surroundings. He said, that's the main thing we can do. And so what do I do as a legislator? They brought that to me. I didn't bring that to them, that approach, which was sanctioned by others, obviously. And so I was going to put it to a vote. I mean, they either were going to reelect me or not. But I felt like it wasn't the end afterward. I mean, I felt like I wouldn't get reelected.
Right.
And so, and then they, gosh, something else came up. I can't remember what it was. But another issue came up, and when it came time, there were 3 people who lined up to run against me.
And is this in the Republican primary? Okay.
And I met with each one of them. And I just said it. It's your right to run. And but in the end, it didn't materialize. I wish I could remember now. There was something that came about that time that took the battle away from just the flag.
There was the teacher.
But something else came up, and so anyway,
Yeah.
I had the votes to get reelected. So that's
Right.
and I was reelected, but I didn't have an opponent. The opponent faded for some reason. So I ran. I had all these people lined up, but they didn't run against me. So with all of that took place, I ran unopposed. And
Life's funny sometimes.
I think it was the transition to the Republican majority is what was happening
Right.
during that period of time. I'm trying to remember. That was an overlying factor.
Were you surprised when Governor Perdue beat Governor Barnes in 2002?
Okay, so I'm still relatively new to politics. There was a backstory to Governor Perdue running because he was a Democrat.
Oh yeah, Senate majority.
And he had crossed swords with another powerful senator, Democrat,
Charles Walker.
And that made Perdue switch to the Republican Party. And then other things happened that Perdue just, I don't know his thought process, but he ran for governor. And of course, Republican Party, we're supporting him. The theory, and so it's not necessarily my opinion, but I was surprised he won. But the fifth quarter quarterbackers, they said there was just a big tent for Barnes, but he got the flaggers mad at him. He got the teachers mad at him, and I can't remember the third. There was a third.
There was the Northern Arc.
Oh yeah,
which is the outer loop.
Yeah.
Through.
So you're talking population density.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't so much that Perdue won the first time as that Barnes lost.
Right.
But see, then we had 2 more years of being Democrat in the House. And
but of course, Speaker Murphy was gone. Speaker Murphy had lost to Bill Heath over in Bremen. So, what was the difference between Speaker Murphy and Speaker Coleman?
So Larry Walker and Terry Coleman both were vying to be Speaker.
Right.
And both are very powerful. Lynn Westmoreland was our minority leader.
Right.
And Lynn had a working relationship with Terry Coleman. And so the behind the scenes coalition was formed by Lynn Westmoreland and Terry Coleman. And no, Lynn Westmoreland, gosh, y'all, trying to think. So Lynn Westmoreland, we went with Larry Walker, and Terry Coleman cobbled together his votes.
Right.
And so Terry became the leader. Terry and I have been friends forever, just because we're sat on the same row. You form friendships. We just maybe for people listening here, your Georgia House does not sit according to party. Our officers sit in the front.
Right.
So it's 5 on either side, but the rest of us are dispersed throughout based on seniority a lot of times and all kind of reasons. And our break rooms are shared. So there's room for friendship to develop and understanding of each other's parts of the state. So I think that's a good thing that went there. But for Terry to get his majority to be Speaker, it was not easy for Terry to be the Speaker, but actually I liked both Larry Walker and Terry Coleman. And so, but it was hard for Terry to hold his coalition, and then the next election we got the majority.
Right.
And it's because, remember, people switched. That night was Mark Burkhalter, Glenn Richardson and Jerry King and Governor Perdue, and there were about 3 Democrats sitting on the fence who were going to switch Republican. That's how we got our majority. Mm-hmm. So we did a coalition too, so to speak. That Terry did. Terry did a coalition. We did too. But so that all changed there. And did I actually answer your question there about Terry? Okay. All right. Terry. You know, there's some people where it's easy to be around. He's just an easy person to be around. You like him, you enjoy his company. Most people do. And so I have remained friends with all these people we're talking about. Mm-hmm. There are very few people in the house that I wouldn't go out of my way to say hey to and want to see them. So.
Well, what was the transition like from being the minority party, which you'd been under with Bob Irvin and Lynn Westmoreland, but now you're in the majority? Mm-hmm. Was that a real wake up call?
So it was for everybody, and it was a wake up call on different layers. Mm-hmm. So remember, the Senate had already made its changes,
right? And
we already had a Republican governor. But in the House, 180 of us, most of the support staff was appointed by Speaker Murphy. Mm-hmm. So we came in as new chairs, but the allegiance of most of the staff, just through friendships, working relationships, was still with the Democrats. And there were just all kind of personal relationships and ties that made it very difficult for any of you new committee chairs to step in and be a committee chair. Mm-hmm. And although we knew our committees, we knew our issues, we didn't know there was just loyalty by staffers to other people.
Sure.
And so that in particular made my job hard. And it wasn't I'm always good friends with the chair, Bob Hanner, but the staff and a lot of the hallway, we call it the people in the hallway, were very loyal and had cultivated friendships with the staffers. So there's a yin-yang pull. I'm trying to be chair, and they're all the lobbyists are trying to hold on to their connections and getting all this stuff going on. And I had there's a particular lobbyist who was good friends with the staffer and was trying to work something unbeknownst to me. And when I found out about it, I just told that particular lobbyist that they just didn't have a place in my office. I couldn't keep him out of my suite because of their actual legislator was in that suite as well, but I could keep him out of my office. And they were upset and complained about me out in the hallway. They also had worked really hard to have contacts with our new speaker and leadership. And so I thought, this is going to be a short-term chairmanship here. And so when I confronted the lobbyists with it, I said, look, this is a transition time, but for now, you don't need to be seen in my office at all. I said, I hope things will settle down. I said, but for now, you just don't have access. And they said, all we want is this and this. And I said, no, you don't have access. I said, it's got to be known that I'm a chair for everybody, not for particular people. And so when I talk to women, and this is what's hard for the culture of a Southern woman, always, we have our mannerisms, we still do. And so I at that moment, I would be thought of 2 different ways, and I knew this. As a female, in charge of a big committee, I'm either going to be a bitch or a pushover, and I chose bitch, So if that is because that's how I would be framed out there, and I just, that's what I chose. I was not going to be pushed around, and if it meant I didn't have something, I didn't have it. So, and maybe that's maybe people say that's just politics. I don't think so. I think it's life. I think you're at crossroads a lot of times in your life where you see your crossroads, you have to take that step. Which way do you go? And so for me, if you bring value, I want to hear from you. If you don't, then I don't want to hear. I don't care if you're for or against something. It just needs to be value to what goes on.
Right.
And there's another story that goes with that would be best talked about over a beer in a bar somewhere. but I really thought I was going to lose my chairmanship, and I actually had to go. I was called by the chief of staff right after that incident, and I thought he's going.
The speaker's chief, or okay.
I thought he was going to let me go. Just say sorry, it's not working out for you to be chair. But the story and what went on was entirely different, and I just thought, oh my God, this is just too much, but it can't be public. But anyway,
Right.
I looked at him and I said, just say it, just tell me. I thought he was just trying to let me go, and he told me something else so entirely different that I went, what? I said, so let's just get this straight. Am I still the chair? He said, you're doing a great job, and you're doing exactly what you should do. You are the chair. You have to establish that you're the chair. No, we want you there. There's just this other thing I need to tell you about. And I went, oh my God. Nobody will ever believe this, and nobody will ever hear this either. But it was an entirely different thing. And my mom and her irony and her humor, I mean, I just thought, oh my gosh. But anyway, so I had to make a decision by myself. I had to exert myself as the chair. I had to exert myself early on that I control the committee. And eventually the working relationship came back around, but it was maybe a year or two. And for a while there, nobody knew how to take me in the hallway, which was probably the best thing in the world. And,
Right.
and so that's just life. I mean, that was just a crossroads. I've seen acrimonious debates for deacons of churches.
Ooh.
I've seen acrimonious debates for between parents and their children. I mean, that's life. You just have to figure out where you are.
Jim Galloway told me one time that the nastiest political campaign he ever witnessed was, I believe, for the Southern Baptist Convention in maybe South Carolina or something like that. So
and you know, it's going on in our church assemblies now. And people are people. I mean, human is human. But there has to remain humaneness, which our whole world is struggling with right now. We are in the United States. Look at Ukraine.
Right.
Look at the early 1920s, 30s, 40s. You know, a history buff looks at life circles a lot
Sure.
of times. So,
well, you know, you've been talking about being in charge of this committee, but when did you get involved with the committee for reapportionment and redistricting?
So you're gonna have to look up when I first got. I had been on that committee for a while. Not the first. Not with Speaker Murphy. I got put on redistricting early on, maybe my second or third term, I'm not sure.
Okay.
So I didn't just get on redistricting.
Right. So what's that process like for a legislator? Because I could see you want to be a part on the one hand, and on the other hand, everybody and their brother is going to be bugging you about their district line in this neighborhood and that mailbox and this and that and the other.
So, one, the people who stay on redistricting, if they stay on it, they will have institutional knowledge of how different processes work.
Right.
And I got deposed when the Democrats were in control. So I was on that committee in early 2000s, come to think of it. And
Speaking of Bobby Kahn.
yeah, and I got asked.
Sorry, Bobby.
I got asked about did I think the redistricting process was fair? This is when we were finally the majority. Okay, so I'm trying to remember back when.
There was a mid-decade reapportionment in 2005 to basically undo the Bobby.
So I'm trying to. So I've served on so many different committees in different times. So I'm trying to remember. So let me. The first redistricting experience I went through was when the Democrats were in control.
Right.
So see, I started serving in '97. So early 2000s.
Right.
The legislator from neighboring county kept coming to me, asking me about my district and would this be a good part of my district for him. So it was all paper back then,
right.
which you've got to know.
That's been a big change.
and so he kept saying, well, and he said, and don't worry, we're going to look after you. But every time he would just, why he would talk to me, I have no idea. But he was giving me an indication of what was going to happen to me. So they started spreading my district in Heard County, Coweta County, and Carroll County. And I started getting spread over as he was talking to me about the different changes they were trying to work with the map makers. We called them the New Jersey map makers. They were the experts. And so, and Governor Barnes was governor. All right, so it's coming back to me. So, so anyway, he kept showing me, he said, now they want this. And I said, you know what, you've finally done it. He said, what? I said, you have found the wealthiest people in my county to be in your district. I said, you have done a good job. So I said, oh, no, I don't want to do that. So that's what it was like back then. So now you got to fast forward
right.
to when the Republicans, and then the Supreme Court was recognizing the spread of 5% one way or another, because still weren't using computers. And so that was an acceptable parameter, and you didn't want to go too far. But so the expressions were packing or cracking districts to favor the parties. And so I got called in once, I guess it was the first Republican redistricting, because that was when the maps were thrown out and we had to redo the maps because the New Jersey map makers had messed everything up.
Maybe it was the Larios case or something like that.
Yeah, it was Larios. Yeah. And Brian Tyson was involved in that. So you're picking my brain pretty well. So anyway, I was one of the ones on the redistricting committee. It was called in the way the maps had been redrawn after the courts had thrown it out. And so I was asked, I was told that there was a challenge to the maps because the maps weren't fair. And it was audio conference at the time, and so I said, so you weren't eyeballing the people, but I said, do you know, fair is a very subjective term. I said, let me describe to you what fair looked like when I was in the minority party. I said, at one point, I think they had me in Alabama, not intentionally, but they had shifted me around so much
the
that
representative from Pell
I said,
City.
you need to really look at, where Biden crosses over and all like this. And I said, and I'll give you another example. I said, it has to be contiguous. To those listening, you have to touch within your district. You can't. So that was trying to confront gerrymandering. And so I said, and one of my friends who lived on the coast said, well, he was contiguous at low tide. And so I said, that was my experience.
That sounds like Jerry Keene.
I didn't say that. So I said, so I said, that was my experience. And I said, the bottom line is the majority party gets to draw the districts and they have to follow certain parameters. And so that was my experience with that deposition. And then you fast forward, and then the Voting Rights Act was the one change to the Voting Rights Act, as we're in the majority party now, was that it didn't have to be reviewed by the Justice Department, but you still had to honor the Voting Rights Act and protect the minority. So now with redistricting, and here we are, we're at 11 million people. In this latest redistricting, we went from 10 million to 11, and so, and a large part of that population was urban, and they tended to settle more in the South Fulton area, and then other pockets of dense population, like with Savannah and Augusta and places like that. So to the person first hearing this, we now have computers, we have numbers, we have programs, we have to put certain, and this is above my pay scale. On the redistricting committee, part of my role is to go around and hear from everybody. We went to 11 meetings. I think I made maybe 10 out of the 11. And so we went to all the, we heard from people. We heard from all over the state. And then, so we absorb the public comment, and then that becomes public record. All of that's public record. But that is what we did as legislators. And then as an individual legislator, my input was what any legislators would be, which is, you know, communities of interest are important. And as much as you can protect that. I don't know of a legislator who didn't say that. And so, but people would say, well, you didn't protect the city. And you go, but redistricting, the census sets the number that we have to follow. I said, and it's humanly impossible to always bring a city into an area or a county into an area, because you have to follow the population. That is the driver. That's the census drives how you do redistricting. Then your overlays. One is the rules of the committee. That's the third one. Actually, the first overlay is, I'm trying to think of, so you look at where your population is, and then, so the number of people. Then you look, then the Voting Rights Act comes in, and you are by law required to do your population in a certain way. You can't put, even though a large part of the growth happened in South Fulton, you can't just make that a black district, a minority district, because the Voting Rights Act says you can't. And so that, and no one individual with 180 legislators, 11 million people, and 159 counties, how do you know, and with the overlay of the majority party gets to set the districts. That's how it starts. And I don't know where the experts with computers, the experts with map making, all of them come in, but they cobble it all together, having to follow all those rules. And so I had numbers to lose. My district theoretically would have just shrunk, but it didn't. I got moved here, I got moved there, I got moved everywhere. And we lost, our county lost some of our county population to South Fulton. That was just think of a puzzle. That's just how all these puzzle pieces went in together. But there was a narrative out there by people who didn't like what happened, that I didn't do enough to protect my district. Well, every legislator tried their best to protect their districts, but we all knew that things would shift. Good examples, and it's one, the chair of our redistricting committee lost her race because redistricting changed her district like it did everybody else's. And so to present a narrative that one person can do anything, you can fight like RIP, which we all did. Maybe where we come in more is trying to help our local governments as they go through the redistricting process. You make the General Assembly resources available to them. So I got beat up over that false narrative that I had something to do with what happened to the northern part of the county. But the bottom line is, if you're from a county or a city or an area and you're a legislator worth your salt, you're going to help constituents either find the right legislator or find the right agency. You never don't serve your constituents or your citizens. So it was the whole thing was how we live right now with social media. What is your narrative and what is your truth? Which is, narrative is what? Prose?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if truth is poetry or not, but it's very difficult for an individual who doesn't follow it all the time, like you do.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult for an individual to even get a handle on what happens.
Right.
And they just want to know that, as bottom line is, if I'm your representative, they need to be able to find me and I need to be able to help them.
Right.
And if you live in my county or you're somebody I know, I'm going to do, you don't lose people, you add to the people you're trying to help.
Well, how has, you're talking about how the district has changed and people moving in, people moving out. How has the district changed, and speaking as a former Chamber of Commerce president, how has this community in West Georgia changed economically since you became involved in the 90s? One industry that comes to mind is like the film industry nearby.
Yeah.
How big of a driver of change and growth has that been?
So we need to start first with the state, because for several years now, the state of Georgia is the recognized state for business, number one for business. We have a lot of existing economies, agriculture, forestry, and then production type things like
the extractive industries.
Yeah. But the film industry, it kind of, in a way, it was just kind of a grassroots thing in the beginning to grow. But our Economic Development Agency was you meant the Deliverance? Deliverance was probably the first movie that
1970?
That kind of was, Georgia was a place to film, but we didn't have any of the backup resources for that. Right. And then as technology increased, communications increased, flexibility, mobility, all of the stuff increased. It was actually in Coweta County that we did the first Seamless Technical Education Center. It became the Central Education Center under Governor Barnes. He was tired of silos. He didn't want a college, university silo. He didn't want a K through 12 silo. He didn't want a technical silo. He felt it should blend more. And my community had already been addressing that problem because one of our major industries was not able to hire a skilled person they needed, and we realized we needed to wake up. If we kept this industry, we needed to train better. So we found out how to blow away all the effective modifiers for education, which was the Central Education Center, which was your springboard to the film industry, because as the film industry grew and the music industry grew, there were talented people who were gravitating more towards our part of the state. And so then you turn around, we had in Sonoy, Georgia, it had different names, but it was their first studio that was built there, and it had the seamless walls, so you could, the green space you could drop in, and it didn't have any sound interruption with airplanes, stuff like that. So we started, that was one of your first seeds of growth. And then from there, the format that we created in Coweta County, and I was part of that. I carried the legislation. I carried the part of the budget that allocated $7 million for the production of seamless technical education in Georgia, which was at Central Education Center.
Right.
So that's an aside. But that whole ability of your executive branch leadership from Barnes on to bust away proprietary education to make it tailor more to needs of community is one of the things that help the growth. And so for Coweta County, definitely the film industry, but we had to surprise ourselves, because at one point when I was chamber chair, we always thought one of our growth areas was going to be in warehousing, which, because we're on the interstate.
Yep.
But we grew instead medically. Piedmont Hospital bought out. I used to be a trustee of the Newnan Hospital Board, and then it combined with the county hospital, and Piedmont Hospital bought that unit. But then Piedmont Hospital made the decision to grow in our area. They built a 9-story hospital. We never even heard of something like that.
9-story.
And it's on the interstate. They're adding a second tower now.
Yeah, they just added a tower.
So follow the interstate where we thought it was going to be nothing but warehouses. And then you go closer to Atlanta, which is the Newnan Peachtree City exit. We've got what used to be Cancer Treatment Centers of America that has now been bought out by the City of Hope, which is a huge recognized cancer research treatment center. So although the film industry is big, the medical industry is huge.
Right.
And it's interesting how something like that just took shape. So when we talk about economics, we are not really, if you abut an urban area, you're still partly bedroom communities.
Sure.
But we are a medical destination now, and we are a movie destination. The only thing with film industry, and actually it's a lot of our economy, it's a gig economy. If you work in the film industry, you work job to job to job to job. And part of our role as state and economic development is making sure these talented people always can go from one job to the next.
Right.
And that's what I work on that committee now, and that's one of our challenges is to make sure with our tax credits that we did, economic development again, we were able to do that. So
come a long way since driving Miss Daisy and fried green tomatoes.
Yeah. My husband used to say driving Miss Crazy when we were in the parades. He just did not want to do that. Are you crazy? Why do you want to ride in the parade? So, but anyway, so are you? I know we're going on. It's time for supper.
I think
Forget
so.
lunch.
Well, well, let's go ahead and wrap up and talk about looking forward. You've been in the legislature since 1996, 1997. We're in that period of flux now where it seems like after years of Democratic dominance, they were supplanted by the Republican Party, and it appears to be a return of two-party competition in Georgia, at least in some areas.
Yeah.
What do you think that means for Georgia and the sort of development and growth that you've seen over the last few years? How do you think increased political competition is going to affect that?
So my overall observation of serving in the General Assembly through the years, there are definite issues that can be easily defined as Democrat and Republican. But at the state level, I can speak for Georgia. Right. And I'm vice chair of something regionally. At your state levels, you're mainly problem solving. You get different issues from different areas, and you got to figure out how to solve the problem. So when it gets election time, it gets political like it did this last year. But overall, as long as we remain citizen legislators, as long as we remain connected to our communities, and as long as we understand that we are a shared state with a lot of just quality of life issues, forget the polarizing election type things. We've got to solve problems, and the goal is a good place to live, work, and play. Quality of life. That's what our job is as a citizen legislator, and I don't see that changing. I do see sometimes directions philosophically changing. I know right now some of the battles are over education. It still defaults down to if you're going to have a democracy, a Republican form of democracy, you've got to have a well-educated citizenry, responsible citizenry. So that never goes away. You've got to figure that out always. You have to figure out your infrastructure. You've always got to work on that. So there are a lot of problems you just have to solve, and that still to me is the role of a citizen legislator. The tornado that hit Newnan
Right.
2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, is a good example. And our part of the state had never been hit with something like that. It was a F4 tornado. Unbeknownst, we called it the midnight tornado.
Yep.
And one of the overwhelming experiences and now observation is that there's so much devastation. How does the state of Georgia help its citizenry recover? And then you look at the hurricanes that hit.
Yep, Hurricane
you start
Michael.
relating to things that happen everywhere. And my local government, so I'm here. I meet and see everybody. I talk to them. I get input. And one of the conversations I was having with our city manager was, he said, I wish there was a way we could have targeted relief for the property owners who face damage. I said, you can't? He said, no. We only, because of the Constitution, can raise and lower millage rates. Mm-hmm. But if we lowered it, we're losing the resources we need from the ones who are whole to help the ones who aren't. And that's a hawk.
Oh, yeah.
Out there. And so I have a very natural backyard, by the way. So it doesn't sound good either. Maybe you sent that in to end the conversation. So anyway,
sounds like
it's a junior hawk.
Okay.
After something.
Right.
And really, you don't advertise when you're trying to get something. So
no,
he's learning.
Well, Lynn.
So long and short of it is.
Oh, there he goes. Wow.
I put the. Do you want to go back?
No.
Okay. So, we have hawks, owls, foxes, rabbits, everything. I have a very natural.
I think he's being chased off by
birds.
mockingbirds.
It would be mockingbirds and crows and all that. But anyway. Back to the tornado.
Yeah. Sorry.
No. Welcome to my world.
Yeah.
This is what anchors me. Just being.
It's a beautiful backyard.
My home, but it's still going to continue. So the long and short of it was, from that conversation, I brought the problem in forms of 2 pieces of legislation to the Ways and Means Committee, and I said, you have the committee institutional knowledge. I don't. But I know we need to give relief to people, and the best example I can tell you is so many people lost their homes the end of March, and they paid taxes on it. Mm. April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. And I said,
and there's
it's
no
phantom
property,
and they're paying taxes on it. I said, nobody wants that. I've talked to my school superintendent. I've talked to everybody. Nobody wants that. And there needs to be a way to target relief. And so there is a constitutional amendment. It'll just be, I call it House Resolution 594, but it will ask the voter in the general election, should the Constitution be amended to give local governments the right to address one-time federally declared natural disasters where the property has been lost.
Right.
One-time break on their taxes. And so that's the question before the voters this fall. And if I were to tell you, to what you're saying about, as long as the people we elect know that they represent people, philosophically they might differ by party, which would be described Democrat or Republican, but the oath of office is never to the party. The oath of office is always to the Constitution of the state of Georgia, the United States, and the citizens we represent. And as long as each person who follows remembers that, we will solve problems. There was a partisan vote the first time on that amendment, but then there was a unanimous vote when everybody acknowledged the fact that we are the voices for the citizens of Georgia. And so it's my hope that this amendment will pass in the fall. But if it's a culmination of what I've done in the most fractious, contentious election year I can remember, people bit the bullet and voted for something that would help everybody.
Right.
And so that's a good way to summarize what I would be my challenge to future legislators. You wear that hat of partisan politics at times, but you're elected for the people.
Right.
So.
Well, Lynn, I think that's a good place to end it. And I wanted to thank you on behalf of the Richard B. Russell Library and the University of Georgia for sitting down and taking some time this morning and this afternoon.
I enjoyed it. I did not pay the hawks to interrupt our
No.
discourse.
Maybe that was one of Speaker Richardson's hawks out there.
Yeah, he did have the hawks. I fought against that name too. I said, "Oh my God, y'all don't want to do that." but this legacy, I hope, is for the people you interview. Maybe there's a thread that is running through. I have no idea how it archives for y'all. But I hope it's a thread of, if you're called to be a servant leader, be a servant leader.
Yep. Well, thank you very much, Lynn. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.